Now we will turn to our panel on open records in Alabama. We are very grateful to Kim Bailey for moderating the panel today. Kim is a member of the League of Women Voters of Greater Tuscaloosa. A native of Indiana, she calls Tuscaloosa home after residing there for 27 years. Kim has spent her entire career at the University of Alabama system, where she is currently the Director of Information Systems and Digital Content. She's an avid reader and loves the challenge of building Lego models. Take it away, Kim.
Morning, and welcome to our panel on open records in Alabama. The panelists will have 2 minutes to answer each question. They will have an opportunity to respond to every question that is asked. And at the end, we will allow them 2 minutes for closing remarks. Carol Prickett, you should see her window pop up. She will give you a warning when you have 30 seconds left, and then again at 15 seconds. So just keep an eye on Carol's window as soon as we see that come up. Participants are invited to send questions to chat or email them to Stephen Stetson, and I think we'll have a slide up in a little while with his email address, so you can send those in. Those will most likely be for a later follow-up. We're not sure if we'll have time to get to those. So you can just send those, and then we will send those back out later. So now I would like to introduce the members of the panel. First, we have Sonny Brassfield. He serves as Executive Director of the Association of County Commissions of Alabama. The association speaks with one voice for county government in Alabama and is a consistent advocate for the programs and people who manage and deliver services to Alabama's citizens. Tish Gotell Faulks is the legal director for the ACLU of Alabama. After law school, she quickly discovered her love for the law as a tool to fight for and protect people. Felicia Mason is Executive Director of the Alabama Press Association. She is the first woman to hold the position in its 150-year history. And Senator Orr was supposed to join us, but he sends his regrets this morning. He is recovering from an illness. Okay, so first we'll get started now with our questions. Ms. Mason, we'll start with you. Senator Orr sponsored Senate Bill 165, the Alabama Public Records Act. In your opinion, why did it not pass? And if you could, describe the fundamental fault lines of disagreement.
Well, I think with any piece of major legislation, you can expect to have a multiple year exercise in trying to work out all the differences. Sonny and I have worked on open meetings many years ago, and it's, when you have two sides that we're not necessarily completely opposite, but we're coming to it from different directions. It just takes a while to do it. And I think we learned that we started out with a comprehensive bill of 165, with Senate Bill 165. And we eventually came around to it being more of an amendment type of bill, where we were just looking at issues that were most relevant to the public. But as I said, with anything that is a piece of major legislation, it just takes a while. And if Alabama Press Association got everything it wanted, I would say that the counties and the cities and the school boards and all of those that we're working with were probably not treated fairly. If they got everything they wanted, then the public would not be treated fairly. So you've got to, it takes time to compromise, and that's kind of where we are right now.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Faulks?
Well, good morning, and thank you for including the ACLU in this panel. I think that one of the challenges of managing legislation and expectations here in Alabama, we have a very short window to get a lot of work done. And when it comes to something like an overhaul of our Open Records Act, it's just not something that would be completed in the regular course of business for our short legislative session. I was thrilled, the affiliate was thrilled to see the recognition that Alabama's Open Rights Act needs some type of repair. It's a fairly toothless mechanism right now. We certainly are of the mind that more transparency is better. But we also understand that we don't want to have every curiosity thrown at the Board of Education, the governor, ADOC. We don't want every single wondering and request taking up time, energy, and effort from the work that needs to be done on behalf of the people of Alabama. But we know that what is currently the course of dealings isn't working. Alabama is one of the least transparent states in the union, and that needs to be changed.
Thank you. And Mr. Brassfield, what would you like to add?
Sure. Thanks again to the league for inviting us, and good Saturday morning to everyone. I think Felicia kind of put her finger on how things have moved forward on this issue up until this point. There are a whole host of interest involved in something this comprehensive. Now, I'm here to talk about the counties, and we can dig as deep as you want to on our concerns as we move forward this morning. Our concerns will line up fairly well with the concerns of the cities and the boards of education, but not exactly. Those organizations have their own concerns as well. State agencies have a different set of concerns. Universities have another set. Public hospitals have another set of issues. And so the bill as introduced this past year was I think, almost the exact same bill introduced in the 2020 session, which of course was cut short by COVID, and there was very little work that was possible on the legislation that year. So I don't know that the advocates for the bill should feel like they're behind, or that there's any reason to believe that something positive can't be passed. But that bill did completely repeal the existing law and created a completely new statute. And for us at the county level, that was of concern. We have decades of court case law that quite honestly, we weren't real comfortable with throwing away and starting over with complete new definitions and those kinds of things. I think most of that got worked out, quite honestly. The Press Association invested an enormous amount of time and effort and elbow grease and honestly resources in helping us move the ball forward during the session. And I think we made substantial progress. Didn't get there all the way, but we made progress.
Okay, so for the next question, we'll start with you, Mr. Brasfield. So as you were having these conversations, what stakeholders do you feel were not at the table, and were there specific perspectives that were missing from the conversation?
Well, from our perspective, the local government groups, cities, counties, school boards, we met collectively with the Alabama Press Association, the three of us. I do know that Brad English, who works with Felicia, would leave meetings with us and go to meetings with other groups. Now, I wasn't present with those meetings, so I don't know all the groups that were involved, but I know the Alabama Press Association knows how to move a piece of legislation along. So I don't think, at least from our perspective, that the current posture of the effort has anything to do with there not being a comprehensive effort to involve everyone. This is a very complicated issue, and I know we'll get into some of those complicated details going forward. But it's easy to say we ought to have more transparency in today's digital world. It's easy to say Alabama's open meetings law is the weakest in the country. I don't know that I agree with that necessarily. But resolving this issue in a positive way is complicated. And so from where we sit, I don't really have any kind of criticism about who was involved and who wasn't involved. From our perspective, we had, once the negotiations started, we had daily access with Brad and the folks from the Press Association. We worked on specific language, the kinds of things that we did. Felicia, I think way back in 2005, I guess, somewhere in there, when we were working on rewriting the open meetings law. So I don't think that's a criticism at all.
Okay, Ms. Faulks, what about you?
Well, I think that part of the challenge here is really addressing the places where we have the least movement in gaining public access to information of public interest and concern. Over the course of the pandemic, I am sure that many people had questions or concerns about how the university systems were determining whether and when to return to classes, the protocol of what was going to occur. And indeed, coming up to the fall, we have those questions and concerns. I don't know that we've heard very much about including the special interest needs and concerns of a university system in being more transparent in how they conduct their business. I would also say that when it comes to public hospitals or other deliverers of public health information, we don't have a lot of transparency and information from those actors. And as far as reconciling the proposed legislation for Alabama with other pre-existing laws, interests, and concerns, I think we really are at a place where we can grandfather in some of the case law that informs us in how much the government is obligated to provide, while still providing a structure that works for a modern social environment in which we could electronically provide access for a lot of information that would free up hands to not have to do it directly, but just be transparent in offering that information to the public.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Mason, what about you? Are there perspectives missing from your?
Well, anytime, again, you start off on down the path of comprehensive legislation, you want all of the interested parties at the table. And a lot of the groups that you mentioned, Ms. Faulks, were there and will continue to be there. They may have different perspectives. Your schools and your hospitals have sensitive information that we have to be aware of, and we have to be respectful of. But I think we had, as Sonny mentioned, those that are most interested in the day-to-day public records from the record holders' perspective were included. And we did have many, many meetings. And Sonny, I may be wrong about this, but I think when the session ended, we were on version 12, 11 or 12 of this bill. So to get through a bill that was, 20, 30 pages long and get to 11 iterations of that, that's a lot of work. And so you certainly want to be, and we want to be, where we are including everyone's voice. The law doesn't work if it's not, and not everybody's going to be happy with it. We don't always get everything we want, but we certainly have to be we have to be willing to hear all those voices.
Okay, thank you. All right, Ms. Faulks, we'll start with you on this question. We live in one of the most partisan and polarized moments in anyone's memory. Do you believe this issue became a conservative versus liberal issue? What do you see as the dividing lines?
I actually don't think that this is an issue that divides that way. Historically, people in power have always wanted to reduce the disclosure of information to the general public. And the general public, depending upon their perception of what the government is, quote unquote, hiding, has wanted to dig deeper. That is not a conservative issue. That is not a progressive issue. That is an issue of free society and the balance between safety, security, private information security, and the obligations of a democracy. What I think is important is to identify the concerns of the stakeholders. Someone in the chat said, what is it that each of us cares about? For the ACLU, we care about transparency of information because the government has a limited role, or should have a limited role, in our everyday lives. Now, what that means ultimately is that for the average citizen in the state of Alabama, you pay your taxes, you go about your business, you raise your family, and you want safety and security while maintaining your liberty. What we ask is that anytime a public servant acts on behalf of the people, that person may be held accountable, that they can explain what they are doing and why, and that those who would seek that information get easy access to it under all circumstances.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Mason, what do you think? Are there?
I agree with Ms. Faulks. I do not see this as a partisan issue. It's a public issue, and citizens, whether they are conservative or liberal, are concerned about this, and it affects them every day in their daily lives. And I just don't see partisanship in this issue.
Mr. Brassfield, what would you like to add?
Sure. I don't think this is an issue that will divide or during the last two sessions has divided along party lines in any way. Now, it's hard for me, even on a Saturday morning, to let a comment go that said that the people in power seek to always reduce the disclosure of information. I've spent the last 34 years working with county officials and county employees around the state, and that's not how I see it in any shape or form. And quite honestly, coming at this issue with that approach is probably one of the reasons why it's been difficult to reach agreement at this point, just to be quite honest. But with regard to there being a Republican or Democrat side or a liberal or conservative side on this issue, I don't think that had anything to do with what happened in the 21 session or will going forward.
Okay, thank you. We've sort of touched on this, but let's expand on it just a little bit. How are the special interest groups who are pushing the reforms perceived by lawmakers and decision makers? What are some concerns that you have in support and against the proposed bill? So we will start with Ms. Mason for this question.
Gosh, you kind of need to have Senator Orr here to answer that, right? Yeah, with varying lobbying groups that I guess you would call us special interest. But, we work every day, day in and day out with legislators, not just on this issue, but on many issues. Sonny's been doing this longer than I have. Right, Sonny? Aren't you older than me? I'm just kidding. But I think that the relationship between the legislators and the lobbyists, obviously they understand it's an important issue for us to be there advocating for it, and they respect that. And so, we are one of many groups that are there proposing legislation and working on behalf of our, for us, it's the public and the press to have access to public records. But I just think in general, I think the perception would be that if we're there and we are making the effort, spending the time, it's important to us, and it's important to a lot of other people as well.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Brassfield, what do you think?
Well, I will stipulate that I am both older and more tired than Felicia is, but we've worked on lots of issues together over the years, and I think the Alabama legislature, especially the leadership and those that are involved in much of the movement of significant legislation like this, I think they understand that everybody has a point of view on an issue like this, and that there has to be time and, quite honestly, room for those groups to resolve the issues that are important to both of them. So, if the question is, does the Alabama legislature give more more credibility on this to counties, more credibility on this to the Press Association? I would say I don't think they see it that way. I think they understand that the Alabama Press Association has an angle at which they come at this issue. It's understandable. It is justifiable, and that Alabama counties have their own angle as well. So I really don't think the legislature sees this perhaps in the way that those outside the process might believe. Quite honestly, the legislature on this issue, as they did on open meetings years ago, turned to the Alabama Press Association and us and said, go work it out. And quite honestly, that's how this process works. At some point, the leadership and those who feel strongly on both sides that are elected members, they stick their toe in there and say, y'all keep working. So I don't think anybody's getting any blame if that's kind of the focus of the question.
Okay, Ms. Faulks, what about you?
I think for me, it's interesting hearing about the stakeholders in this process. From my perspective as the lead litigator for the ACLU, my stakeholders are generally private individuals who have questions or concerns about how the government is impacting their lives. I'm not certain that the concerns and interests of the people are always at the forefront of legislators' concerns or the Press Association. The question comes here in the comments about government officials who are concerned that more rigorous transparency will create more work for them. I don't think that that's what the press is concerned with or advocating or addressing, but I do think that the average citizen might have interest or concerns that would require a bit more work if they were going to be able to get the transparency that they want. And I'm not certain whether or not those interests and concerns are always placed at the forefront in the legislative process at this juncture. I am certainly open to the idea that as we get to a more finished product, we start dealing not with the document requests of institutions and pillars of our democracy, but the individuals who have very specialized questions. And for the ACLU, we want to speak for those individuals, the people who really just need access to a videotape, not the full economic disclosure of a department.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Faulks, we'll start with you on this question. So this is changing tactics just a little bit, but when these requests come in, how do you balance access to information with individuals' privacy?
Well, I think that one of the central concerns for the ACLU is that the individual and their closely held private information are protected as much as possible, while still giving the public access to information that they may need. For example, if I ask the question, how many heart attacks were presented at X public hospital, I am not asking who are the individuals who were believed to have been suffering a heart attack, which would require that you disclose private medical information about individuals. I am asking for broader anonymous information so that I can do my research into whatever I'm doing. I think that what we often find is that the strenuous protection of private information is used as an excuse to avoid giving broader information that may have negative implications. And while privacy is tantamount for the ACLU, the access to broader community information is key and important. As we move forward, I think it's a false dichotomy to claim that privacy concerns prohibit any type of disclosure. And it's something that the Alabama Open Records Act seems to tolerate entirely too often.
Thank you. Mr. Brassfield?
Well, certainly the privacy issues, for us are one of the things that are on the table that we have to try to address in any new piece of legislation. From our perspective, those relate to, personnel records. Those relate to things in law enforcement that are protected for those reasons. And it also relates to things like economic development, recruitment activities while we're still trying to secure new businesses in the state. I think those are the kind of things that everyone would agree are to be disclosed. The question's when, and those are the kinds of things that when you get around the negotiating table, you try to find a workable solution. As Felicia said when we started, probably not everything that those who would advocate for complete and immediate openness of all documentation, probably not exactly what they would want, and probably not exactly what those who have difficulty, as is mentioned in one of the questions, having enough staff to respond to requests to questions, especially if we begin to open up this process to electronic requests from all over the country, or perhaps even all over the world. There is a concern about the ability to respond to those requests, especially by small governments that may have 2 or 3 people who work there. But the privacy issues can be worked out as long as everyone concedes and understands that it's more about timing than it is about the information.
And Ms. Mason?
Well, certainly privacy is a concern for all of us. I mean, those of us sitting around the table negotiating are individuals too. And so we understand that privacy issues are to be part of this discussion. I think Sonny's right. I think we can do that. I think some of the issues that he brought up, we addressed in the open meetings law. When, for instance, when you're talking about economic development, it's when is it disclosed, not if it is disclosed. And that part of, I think the confusion that comes in with that in our law is how vague it is now, and where it really doesn't address that at all. And part of the reason that we're here doing this is to create more, I wouldn't say definitions, but more clarity that will be guidance for the public and the press, and guidance for the government officials or those who hold the records. But getting back to the core question, privacy is always a concern, and it gets more so every day. But I think we are given the tools to address that. We've just got to figure out how to get it into the statute.
Okay, thank you. So we know that there are many other states who have more, broader laws for open records than Alabama. So what problems have other states experienced? Are the problems that may come up with a more open records act, are those scare tactics, or is there empirical evidence that other states have, that they've experienced problems when they open up their records? So, what can we learn from other states as we move forward here? Mr. Brassfield?
Well, as Felicia said, I've spent the last 200 years representing counties here in Alabama, so I'm not really hold myself out as an expert on the difficulties that have been encountered in other states. I think we've shifted in terms of how we handle things legislatively here in Alabama, and we try to spend a great deal of time looking at other states. We've had discussions. Some provisions of the bill that were introduced came from Tennessee. And their statute. I do think it's important for everybody involved in this process, certainly everybody this morning. If you go to Alabama's open records law, it's about 3 sentences long. And so if you said, golly, we have a horribly short open records law, there's no definitions in it, there's no provisions for time, that all of these things that you would list that you find in all the other statutes around the country. Well, the truth is Alabama's courts have established all of those things. We all know what a public writing is. There's been scores of litigation about that. Now that definition's not in the statute, but that definition has been defined by the court, and it carries just as much weight as it would if it were written in the statute. So I think the frame that many people who don't work in this every day may see that's around the whole issue of open records is our law's 3 sentences long, therefore our law is bad. I do think from anyone's perspective, our law needs improving, our law needs expanding, our law needs, a more specific definition, but our law is much more than the 3 sentences you see in the code book.
Now, I would actually say that relying on case law and development through court to understand our Open Records Act is in and of itself a problem, because that therefore means that the court has written and defined what our Open Records Act means or says, rather than the legislators doing it, rather than the legislature doing the hard work of defining and holding accountable and placing what is or is not to be covered under the law. And I would further go on to say that for the average person who wants to understand what our open records law requires, requests, and will accept, it's unreasonable to expect that person to have to go to case law and basically act as their own lawyer to figure out the outer limits of what our Open Records Act will do, especially when our court records are not easy to gain access to. They are not freely available to every person under all circumstances. The ability to pull up the act, read it, and to understand the outer limits of what that act can and cannot do should be on the face of the legislation. It shouldn't require that you have a Juris Doctorate to understand under what circumstances the government can or can deny your information request.
Ms. Mason?
Well, certainly it is difficult for to get all the information related to public access, given that it's spread out. And, certainly we should have done this many years ago. But here we are now trying to do just that. And I think, as Sonny said, we looked around at what some other states are doing and how the practices of their government officials. And take, for instance, our law doesn't say or put a time limit on when a government body has to respond. That's important. That's something that's important to us. And there are lots of different examples throughout the other state statutes. And so finding one that works for us is something that we're working for. What you're describing as it being very difficult and you having to be a lawyer to figure it out, if it's not something you deal with every day, that's true. But I mean, that's why we're here. That's what we're doing. And that's, we're certainly attempting to try to put something together that works. It works for the public. It works for government officials and government entities. And it's easily understood.
Okay. Now, I believe this is a question that might have been in the chat. So we'll start with Ms. Mason on this one. Some local government officials say more robust transparency will create too much work for them. Do you believe that's true? And is there any chance of open records legislation coming with funding to digitize or increase man hours?
I don't know that I can address the funding issue. I think that having more work being put on the government officials it certainly is a concern for them. But we're not opening anything that is currently closed. The exceptions remain the same. But there are areas in our state, because we are primarily a rural state, where you have you do not have a large staff to be able to say, you know, I need this document, and it's, you know, regardless of where it is, and it's you know, it's a big document. That's an issue we've got to work out. It's a concern for the record holder. Sonny can probably address that better than I can. But it is just it's just something that we need to have. We need to have defined, and as I said with the last question, something that we will have a specific number of days you have to respond. Now, not necessarily hand over the material. And as someone mentioned earlier, we have to recognize that we don't want it to just open it up to anyone can ask for anything from anywhere, just because, you know, that when you pick out the lowest common denominator in the what if situation, and someone comes in and wants 8 years of this or that, that's a concern for the record holder, and we've just got to work through those issues.
Okay, Mr. Brassfield, this is kind of your wheelhouse. How do you feel?
Thanks. Well, Felicia knows exactly what I'm about to say. The question about additional work and additional cost depends on whether we're talking about documents that the entity has in its possession, or whether the request is for information. Let me give you an example. You show up at the Crenshaw County Courthouse yesterday afternoon. There are 3 people that work in the county commission office, an accounts payable clerk, an accounts receivable clerk, and the county administrator. If you say, okay, they're resurfacing County Road 7, I'd like to see the contract on that. I'd like to see the cost. That's a document the county has in its possession, and the county can get that and hand that to you for you to see it over the counter without much trouble and without much cost. If you show up and say, you're resurfacing County Road 7, I want to know how many times has it been resurfaced in the last 30 years? Who are the companies that did it? How much did each, you know, project cost? How long did it take? All of those requests, that's all public information. You should have access to it, but somebody's got to pull all that together. And so those are some of the things we honestly have been trying to work through. How do you differentiate between those two things? One thing doesn't cost anything, doesn't take any time at all. Another request is legitimate. It's public information. You have access to it. How do we put that document together, and whose responsibility is it for paying for the research? And in some places that's an issue. In some places, you know, there's plenty of staff. So again, one of those things we're working on.
I think that something that we also need to begin to be honest about is that although the state of Alabama is a relatively rural state, the advantages of technology are bridging gaps in ways that we never could have imagined even 20 years ago when I graduated from law school. I think that part of what we need to do, both legislatively and practically, is have a plan to make electronic access possible from a date certain forward of basic raw data that we know is of interest to the public, to economists, to historians, to all of the different kinds of information that people generally seek, while we figure out a methodology to give electronic access to contemporary documents from 5, 10, 15 years ago. I also think that we need to give serious consideration to a different access policy for quote unquote ancient documents. That is, documents that are 50 years or older, but we know we still have access or research interest. For a police investigation that occurred in 1972, there's no reason generally that those records shouldn't be made available to a criminologist who's doing research about a particular criminal event. And I think that if we start thinking about it that way, we may at least build from this point forward a more transparent apparatus.
Okay, thank you. So we'll start, Ms. Faulks, with you. Would you support penalties for failure to comply with open records requests? And what about appeals to rejections? What might that look like?
I actually think that the Constitution requires an appeals process. I wrote in the chat that generally when a custodian fails to provide covered open records request information, there is very little that one can do to enforce short of filing suit. That's highly inefficient. It takes up a lot of time, energy, and effort, both for the custodian and for the party seeking the information. And so I am not settled on penalties, but I do think that it is critical to have a transparent process in which someone seeking information is advised as to why they have not received that information and a formal statement to that end. Often when I am filing public records requests, I just don't get an answer. Not that I am denied the documents that I am seeking, but just flat out silence. And if someone from the ACLU can't get responsiveness from a record custodian, what is Mr. Jones, of no particular background, interest, or concern, going to get when he is seeking documents or information? I think that there needs to be a formalizing process. And again, that is just going to take up more time, energy, and resources. But I think it is valuable and worth it to the Alabama public that they have at least that courtesy.
Okay, Ms. Mason?
Well, we certainly think that there needs to be some sort of independent appeals process. It is true that now when you're denied a record, there's hardly anything you can do but to go to court. And that's just not an efficient way for anybody, not for the press or the public. So that's one avenue that we are seeking, is to get some sort of independent ombudsman or something that either side can go to, whether they are, believe they have a document that is not public, as well as the public being able to go get it. As far as fees, yes, I think there should be some sort of penalty. It shouldn't be an exorbitant amount of money, but there's that's kind of what puts teeth into the law. And as I mentioned earlier, one cornerstone of what we're trying to get is a limited number of days that a document holder has to respond, because not responding it should not be an option. There should be some sort of limit. Now, what that is, how many days and so forth, is kind of where I think the group is working on to try to get there. But yes, I certainly think that there should be something other than going to the court system, which is slow and costly, that would be a resolution for a document that has been denied or just has been a request that's been ignored.
Mr. Brassfield?
Well, the issue of some step between the request being made and filing something in court, what that step is and how it works was one of the things that we spent the most time on this past session, trying to talk through. Felicia mentioned there were 12 versions. Felicia, remind Brad that he owes me lunch. I predicted when we started that we would have it at more than 10 versions, and he said no way. But we didn't resolve that issue. I understand the concerns of those who show up, at a public entity, make a request, get no response within a reasonable time limit. I think we had a good bit of that worked out last session. The penalty issues for us, the bill as introduced, would have had those penalties levied personally against the public employee rather than against the public body. That was of concern to us. I think we got most of that worked out as well. We do, just to be transparent here on a Saturday morning. We're not particularly excited about a state employee being able to tell a public body whether or not a document is public and should be disclosed. I think if you had any state agency here, any of the universities here, any school here, any municipality here, I think everybody would say the same thing. Should there be an intermediate step? We don't have an opposition to that. Is the immediate step a state employee with the power to overrule a county governing body? We've still got to work on that some.
Sorry, you said what the enforcement should not look like. What should it look like? Oh, you're muted.
You were muted for a minute. Did you start with me? Can you
yes,
say that
I'm
again?
Sorry. Yes. So you said that what the enforcement from your perspective should not look like. What do you think it should look like? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, we've mentioned this a couple of times already. We the Press Association in the counties sat down over probably a year, Felicia, something like that, and completely rewrote Alabama's open meetings law a few years ago. That process worked so well. We've amended it, I think, 3 times since then to make what I think the Press Association would consider improvements. And those things occurred without a whole lot of knuckle busting and finger pointing. We worked through that. The open meetings law has an expedited, less expensive, more direct court avenue than what would be used using the regular process in civil procedure. For us, I think something like that would make it easier for us to get in front of an impartial person, make it less expensive, shorten the time limit. I think those are things that for us seem reasonable. We have concerns about a state employee. I mean, it has nothing to do with the state. We have concern about any employee on their own having the ability to dictate to a public body. But is there a shortened, less expensive, less complicated way to do it? We think the open meetings law would be a place to start that discussion.
Okay, that was sort of a follow-up. So Ms. Mason or Ms. Faulks, do you have any additional comments on that topic?
I do. I think that part of what I bring to this conversation is perhaps a naive belief that documents and information generated by a public service employee are by their nature appropriate for public consumption, and the exception should not consume the rule. And so from my perspective, a lot of information that we are talking about there really doesn't need to be this high level analysis of whether or not it should be disclosed. The high level function is it's not going to be disclosed. Do we have clear guidance as to why it's not? And everything else is open and fair game. Now, I understand that sometimes the requests are asking for a synthesis of information, the creation of something. And I'm not necessarily certain that that custodians have an obligation to create the thing that's being sought. If they have the raw data that's being asked for, disclose it as a matter of course. But the creation of data, I certainly think that that is a level of provision that may be excessive. And I think that the nuance between what is and is not creating new information is something that could statutorily be defined and should statutorily be defined. But the default should be disclosure, with non-disclosure being the exception that calls for review or analysis by a higher figure or an attorney.
Ms. Mason, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think the idea of an independent appeals process is just one of the issues that we're struggling with. I don't think any group is against that. It's just, who should it be? As Sonny said, we don't think it ought to be a state employee. And so, going back to the courts is something that we're trying to avoid. But that is, I think, a very good example of a complicated issue that has many different sides and many different many different aspects that we're just going to have to work out. And it's not easy and it takes time. In a perfect world, absolutely, anything that's open is open and there should never be a question about it. But, we don't live in a perfect world. We never have. We're not going to, not on earth anyway. And so we just have to work around these issues and see, where can we find the common ground that would get us to where we want to be.
Okay, thank you. So this will be our last question before moving into closing statements. You all seem very open to, having this law pass. And so what sort of work is being done between the legislative sessions to work out the kinks and disagreements? Is there a conversation and some consensus building going on during this time? And we'll start with Ms. Mason.
Well, as Sonny mentioned, he's going to have to get with Brad, who works in my office and works on this day to day in the legislature, for lunch. We have not done a lot of negotiations since the legislative session ended. I suspect as we move through the fall and get ready for January, that we will get back to this. Everybody, when the legislature is over with and you've spent 3 days a week. Well, this legislative session was different because you didn't have real access to the State House. But after you spend those 3 intense days working on a myriad of bills, not just this bill, all of us have different, this is not the only thing any of us are working on. And so you kind of want to step back and take a break, and we all generally have meetings. Our association meetings in the summertime. So, we're going to have to come back around, but certainly before January, when the 2022 legislative session starts, I think we will have circle back around to everybody, try to get with Senator Orr and see where we go.
And Ms. Faulks?
I would say that at this particular moment in history, um, Alabama, both as a state and its larger municipalities, are getting generational change funding from the federal government that has the potential to really alter the trajectory of what our state and our municipal actors are able to do for the people of Alabama. I think that it's important that some of that CARES Act funding go towards building more transparency between uh, custodial record holders and the general public. And I would encourage everyone who is in attendance to be part of the process in your area and in the state of Alabama, and encouraging that some of that funding go towards building greater access to public records, documents, information. I think that technology is going to be key in whatever we do for Alabama transparency moving forward. We are in a place where 250,000 households lack reliable access to internet services or to cell phone services. And we could use this funding to improve that number and to expand access to our government with that funding. And I think that that is part and parcel of what our legislature needs to be called to do when we see a call for a special session, which we know is imperative to occur sometime in the early fall.
Ms. Brassfield?
Well, Felicia's right. We really didn't have access to the Alabama State House this session, which made negotiation a little more tricky. I did learn that if I stay out of the Alabama State House, we can pass all our legislation. So maybe what I learned this year is that I ought to do less work rather than more. But this is probably not, in my opinion, an issue that's going to be resolved while the legislature is in session. Especially not in an election year, and especially not with so many other major issues in front of the Alabama legislature. We've created a committee of county administrators to help us more formalize our position for the negotiating process on a few issues. We've talked about some of those this morning, but I think that most of the hard work on an issue like this has to take place when the legislature is not in session. Once the session starts in a typical year, about 600 pieces of legislation that are introduced impact county government in one way or another. So it becomes very difficult with our staff for somebody on our policy team to sit down and work out something this complicated. If you get it close, and you only have a few things to resolve, then maybe that can happen. But honestly, this is going to be a tough one. Just to be honest, on a Saturday morning, this is a very complicated issue. Easy to say, ought to be more transparency. Really, really difficult to put the words on the paper.
Thank you so much. And now it's hard to believe, but we have are coming upon the end of our hour and change here. And so we're ready for closing remarks. And we will start those with Ms. Faulks.
Thank you, Kim. And again, thank you, League of Women Voters of Alabama, for inviting the ACLU to participate. Transparency is the key element to all of the other civil rights and civil liberties work that goes on for the ACLU affiliate. The ability to seek information from the government and to compare that information to what we believe should be the course of dealings or the best course as laid out by the Constitution is critical. The work that goes into transparency is vital to continuing our republic as it currently stands. I thank Mr. Brasfield and Ms. Mason for the hard work, energy, effort, and career defining efforts that they put towards helping the people of Alabama and the government of Alabama work in a way that is going to be productive and secure for its people. Moving forward, I think that the most important actor in ensuring transparency for Alabamians are the people of Alabama, calling on you to hold your elected officials accountable, to push for the public information that you want or need for the decisions that need to be made for your communities, your organizations, and your families. The ACLU is here to provide support, assistance, and guidance to the extent that we can. And we hope that this is an effort that continues to move forward in a positive way.
Thank you so much. Mr. Brassfield?
Again, I'll echo the comments about thanking the League of Women Voters for bringing some focus on this issue this morning. We have, we're moving very, very hard to try to get our meetings back in person. I know y'all are looking forward to that as well. But for those who don't know the effort that it takes to put together a virtual convention, there's nothing virtual about the hard work to get this together. And I applaud you for making the extra effort to be able to gather as a group. For us, I think there are a couple of things that I hope have come through with regard to my comments. And that is that we see a difference between access to documents and access to information. And that as we move forward in trying to resolve that issue, we've got to take into account those differences. We also see a difference between access to information and the public body preparing and providing information. And those two things also have to be resolved in some way for us to move forward. Documents that the 67 county commissions hold that are not some other way protected by a court need to be accessible to you with a time for response, and you need to be able to show up and get that information. Research that we would have to do for you, that's a different issue, and we need to find a way to work that out. I would say to you, the Press Association and the County Commission Association have worked out some difficult things over the years, and we'll get this one worked out too. Maybe not as fast as any one of us would like it to happen, but we'll get it worked out.
Okay, and Ms. Mason, can you close us out?
Well, I too wanted to thank the League of Women Voters for putting us all together and having the discussion. I think it's important. I think that, the issue of public records isn't an issue until a citizen is denied, and then it becomes a very big issue. So the things that we are working on in this, as you know now that you've heard, are not simple. And so I think Sonny and his group and the other groups that are working, and my group included, we're committed to this. And we're committed to work on it. It's not going to be a quick and it's just not going to be. It's just not possible. But we have a history of being able to do that, and we appreciate the other groups that come to the table and respect each other. It's just we've got to go through this process to get the best thing that we can get for our state. We certainly think there should be a time limit on the response time. We think there should be a limit on how much an entity can charge. We think that because that shouldn't be a way to make it cost prohibitive. We think there should be the independent appeals process or something that looks somewhat like that. And there should be a penalty. There should be some teeth in the law. Those are the things that are most important to us. And the other groups have their important issues as well. But I think the message I would give to this group and to the public at large is to be patient with us, because we are really working on it. And the groups that are working on this have the best interests of the people of Alabama at heart, and I believe that.
Well, thank you so much. On behalf of the league, I really want to thank you for spending your Saturday morning with us, for sharing your perspectives. It has been very informative on an issue that, as I'm sure you know, is near and dear to our hearts. So we just really appreciate you giving your honest and informed opinions. So thank you so much.
You're
Have a
welcome.
good day.
Thanks. Have a good day.
Thank you.